Okay, let's dive in. Today, we're going to break down a new paper that takes on some really persistent and pretty controversial claims about the Jewish people, and it does it with hard evidence. So let's get straight to it.
So what's with this number, 361%? Well, according to the Anti-Defamation League, that's the jump in anti-Semitic incidents reported on U.S. college campuses in just 1 year, from 2022 to 2023. It's a huge spike, and it's exactly why the paper we're looking at argues that these ideas we're about to talk about, they're not just some dusty old historical debates. They have very real, very urgent consequences right now.
And if you need more context, just look at this FBI data. It's pretty staggering. Jews make up less than 2% of the U.S. population, right? But they are the targets of over 60% of all religiously motivated hate crimes. Think about that for a second. This is the backdrop for the paper we're diving into. It's not just an academic exercise, it's presented as a direct response to a very clear and present issue.
So, what's the game plan here? The paper zeroes in on 3 core narratives and aims to dismantle them piece by piece, and it uses a really interesting toolkit to do it: genetics, history, and international law. We're going to follow that exact structure, looking at each argument and the evidence the paper brings to the table.
All right, first up is the big one, origins. The paper tackles a claim you sometimes hear, the idea that modern Jews aren't actually related to the ancient Israelites. You know, the argument that they're essentially outsiders in their ancestral homeland.
So, what's the paper's rebuttal? It goes straight to the science. It highlights these major genetic studies. We're talking groundbreaking work from scientists like Doron Bihar and Gil Atzmon. And their findings? Well, they're pretty conclusive. They found that Jewish communities all over the world, whether they're in Europe, North Africa, wherever, they all share a common genetic origin in the Middle East, specifically the Levant.
Now, to be fair, the paper does mention a different theory you might have heard of, the Khazarian hypothesis. This is the idea that Ashkenazi Jews are mainly descended from a Turkic group that converted to Judaism a long time ago. But, and this is a big but, the paper also notes that this hypothesis has been really heavily criticized by a lot of geneticists. They say it has some serious methodological problems, like focusing on just a few genetic markers that aren't even exclusive to Turkic groups, while at the same time ignoring a mountain of other data that points right back to the Levant. Okay, so with that genetic link established, the paper moves on to its second major point. This one tackles a different kind of argument, the idea that Judaism is just a religion, and not a people or a nation with a right to self-determination.
And right at the core of this discussion is a Hebrew term, Yisrael, which literally means the people of Israel. The paper makes the case that this is way more than just a religious label. It's about peoplehood. It's this rich, complex identity that's all woven together from shared faith, a unique culture, a legal tradition, and this collective memory that goes back thousands of years.
And to really break it down, the paper looks at this identity through 4 different but overlapping lenses. You've got the religious part, right? The covenant, the Torah. Then there's the cultural part, shared languages, traditions, customs. You also have the historical lens, this unbroken story from ancient times to today. And finally, and this is key, the political aspect, a history of its own laws, governance, and even sovereignty. The paper's point is that you really need to see all 4 of these together to understand what peoplehood means in this context. And here's a really interesting point the paper makes. This identity isn't racial. It's described as covenantal. What does that mean? It means that someone can join the Jewish people through conversion and have full membership. The bond isn't just about bloodlines, it's about a shared commitment and a covenant. And the paper argues this actually strengthens the claim to being a nation, not just a race. And this idea of Jewish peoplehood wasn't just some internal concept. The paper points out that it was actually recognized formally in international law again and again in the 20th century. You can see it in things like the League of Nations mandate and later in key UN resolutions. The international community legally acknowledged this historical connection and the right to reestablish a national home.
All right, that brings us to the third and final pillar that the paper sets out to dismantle. And this one takes a sharp turn from identity into the world of conspiracy theories. We're talking about the age-old, toxic myth of a secret Jewish cabal plotting to take over the world.
So where does this stuff come from? Well, the paper traces it back to a single, infamous text, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And it identifies this document as basically the founding myth, the OG text for nearly every modern conspiracy theory about a secret Jewish plot. It's pretty much the blueprint for this specific, dangerous lie. So, what is this document really? The paper leaves absolutely no room for doubt.
It's a complete and total forgery. It was cooked up by the Russian secret police back in the Tsarist era, around the early 1900s. And get this, it wasn't even original. A huge chunk of it was just plagiarized from an old French political satire that had nothing to do with Jewish people. The whole point of its creation was just to stir up anti-Semitism.
And this isn't some new discovery. The paper points out that this thing's been debunked for over 100 years. The Times of London exposed it as a fake all the way back in 1921. The U.S. Congress has called it out as a forgery multiple times. I mean, the consensus among historians and scholars on this is absolutely overwhelming and has been for a very, very long time.
Okay, so the paper has laid out all this evidence, right? The genetics, the history, the legal stuff, the debunked forgery. So what's the big takeaway? This is where it all comes together to talk about why these old myths are still so relevant today. It's all about information warfare.
So let's wrap up the paper's main strategic points. First, the genetic evidence. It confirms a continuous link to the ancient Middle East. Second, international law. It affirmed the Jewish people's right to a national home. And third, the fact that a proven fake like the protocols is still floating around. It's a perfect example of how disinformation works. It can be a powerful weapon that just keeps going, shaping how people think long after it's been proven to be a lie.
So what do we do about it? How do you fight these kinds of persistent lies? Well, this is the paper's final thought. The author argues that censorship isn't the answer. In fact, it can sometimes make things worse. The real antidote, they suggest, is education. It's the slow, steady, patient work of teaching people how to think critically and spot disinformation for themselves. And that's really the big question the paper leaves hanging in the air. It lays out a case based on solid evidence, but the bigger challenge is still out there. In our current age of information warfare, where a lie can circle the globe before the truth even gets its boots on, how do we actually defend the truth? It's something we all really need to think about.